At this week's NATO press conference, Prime Minister Keir Starmer took just 2 questions from the press before swiftly making his exit. As journalists shouted questions about his apparent breach of strict COVID-19 lockdown rules during Christmas 2020, when he met with his personal voice coach Leonie Mellinger, Starmer appeared visibly uncomfortable. He hesitated, muttered, "Of course not," and then hastily added, "All rules were followed." But his response was far from convincing, and the facts surrounding this scandal tell a different story. But first, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and join our rapidly expanding community. To fully understand the significance of this revelation, it is necessary to revisit the context of Britain in December 2020. The country was in the midst of an escalating crisis, with COVID-19 claiming 1,000 lives per day. The government, desperate to slow the spread of the virus, implemented its strictest lockdown yet. The rules were clear. Only key workers were allowed to leave their homes for work, while millions of ordinary people were confined indoors. International flights have been banned. International borders have been shut, and there's now severe disruption at British ports. Families were unable to see one another. Businesses were forced to close, and heartbreaking stories of people dying alone in hospitals became all too common. The consequences of breaking these rules were severe. Police were enforcing the measures rigorously, issuing fines, making arrests, and publicly shaming those caught violating the restrictions. The sense of duty was drilled into the public. This was not a time for exceptions. The strict COVID regulations were not mere guidelines. They were rigidly enforced laws that dictated every aspect of daily life. Families were separated, businesses collapsed, and the nation was plunged into a period of immense personal and economic hardship. Keir Starmer was among those who vocally championed these measures, arguing that they were necessary to protect public health. While the public endured these restrictions, Leonie Mellinger posted a selfie on the 24th of December 2020, documenting her visit to Keir Starmer in London. She had travelled 60 miles, claiming her journey was exempt from lockdown rules because she was classified as a key worker. However, there is no evidence to support this claim. Government guidelines at the time were explicit about which professions qualified for key worker status: doctors, nurses, emergency responders, and others performing essential public services. Voice coaches and actresses were not included in any of these categories. Despite this, neither Starmer nor his team have been able to produce any documentation proving Mellinger's exemption. His forensic legal team, usually quick to scrutinise others, have failed to justify why a personal voice coach was meeting him in person at a time when even close family members were forbidden from gathering. The rules were unambiguous, and yet Starmer, who had built his political persona on demanding strict adherence to them, saw no issue in arranging a face-to-face session with a voice coach while the rest of the country suffered under restrictions. This is particularly damning given Starmer's previous stance on those who broke COVID rules. During the height of the Partygate scandal in April 2022, he launched a relentless attack on Boris Johnson, insisting that breaches of lockdown rules were unacceptable and must result in resignations. In a speech to Parliament, he used the story of John Robinson, a man who had obeyed the restrictions even as his wife lay dying in hospital, to illustrate the moral gravity of Johnson's alleged misconduct. Starmer argued that John Robinson would have given anything to hold his wife's hand for just 9 minutes, the same length of time Boris Johnson had spent in the Cabinet Room celebrating his birthday in June 2020. The event for which both Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak were handed fixed penalty notices. The point that Keir Starmer was trying to make was that it didn't matter if it was for a short period of time. He painted a clear picture. The rules applied to everyone, and those who broke them had to be held accountable. Yet now, when faced with questions about his own conduct, Starmer has chosen evasion. He has refused to explain how Mellinger's visit was justified under the government's lockdown criteria. 10 has declined to comment, while his political aides insist that no rules were broken, but have failed to provide any supporting evidence. Even more tellingly, Mellinger herself admitted in a LinkedIn post in 2021 that she had only resumed in-person coaching 6 months later, further proving that her December 2020 meeting with Starmer was in breach of lockdown regulations. This revelation exposes a deep hypocrisy at the heart of Starmer's leadership. He was unequivocal in his calls for Boris Johnson to resign over a 9-minute gathering in the cabinet room, despite the fact that all attendees worked together daily, and the event had been dismissed as unremarkable by the Times at the time. Now, when he himself is accused of breaking lockdown rules, he offers vague denials and refuses to engage with legitimate scrutiny. The question of credibility is inescapable. Starmer's political brand has been built on the image of a principled leader, someone who holds others accountable and plays by the rules. During a previous police investigation into lockdown breaches, he even went as far as to state that if he were found to have broken COVID rules, he would resign. Now, confronted with clear evidence of his own transgression, he remains silent. For the British public, this is more than just another political controversy. It speaks to the broader issue of double standards in leadership. While ordinary people were fined, arrested, and vilified for even minor breaches of lockdown rules, the man who insisted on their strict enforcement appears to have had no problem bending them for his own convenience. Those who missed final moments with dying loved ones, who were unable to comfort grieving family members, who suffered through months of isolation, have every right to be furious. The British people to once again step up to the challenges as they've done at every stage of the pandemic. But they expect the government to do the same. We can have no more over-promising and false hope, no more confused messages and slow decision-making. The people deserve answers, and if Keir Starmer truly believes in the principles he so forcefully advocated for, he must hold himself to the same standard he imposed on others. If he fails to do so, his credibility as a leader will be permanently damaged, and the accusations of hypocrisy will only grow louder. At its core, this scandal is not just about a single instance of rule-breaking. It is about trust, integrity, and the fundamental question of accountability in leadership. It raises a far more significant issue. Do those in power believe they are above the very rules they impose on the public? When millions were making unimaginable sacrifices, missing final goodbyes, grieving alone, and following restrictions at great personal cost, was Keir Starmer operating under a different set of standards? His handling of this situation will be a defining moment in how he is perceived by the British public. Will he demonstrate the accountability he has so forcefully demanded from others and take ownership of his actions? Will he acknowledge the contradiction between his words and his behaviour, accepting that trust in leadership is built on consistency, not convenience? Or will he continue to evade scrutiny, brushing aside legitimate questions and hoping that public attention will eventually shift elsewhere? A leader who once stood on a platform of principles and responsibility must now face the very test he once set for others. Whether he upholds his own standard or falls into blatant hypocrisy will determine not just the outcome of this scandal, but his credibility as a leader moving forward. Kremer has previously declared strongly about Boris Johnson that we need strong, clear and decisive leadership. The Prime Minister needs to be straight with people about precisely what's going on and precisely what he is going to do about it. And there could be no better time than now for him to prove the bold arguments he once so passionately made. So, what's your take on today's discussion? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't already, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more in-depth coverage of British affairs. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and see you next time.